I'm going to cover a story today that started in what feels like an eternity ago. Father Carlos Martins was a celebrity priest, a term that a lot of people don't like, but very high profile priest, very open about his past as an exorcist. He would give talks about exorcisms and other things. And he had been on tour with a relic. And if something is alleged to have happened at at a meeting, and it shows you exactly the cross that priests have to bear, because it is nearly impossible once a priest is accused of wrongdoing in the post-McCarrick environment, it is nearly impossible for them to get their good name back. I would be shocked if he was able to continue his ministry, despite the fact that his name was cleared of all wrongdoing. Go to Raymond Arroyo on X. This is posted by a lot of sources, but Raymond Arroyo, most people think that he's not one to get suckered into fake news. He posted this: charges dropped against Father Carlos Martins, host of the Exorcist Files. One hopes he is instantly restored to ministry and supported by his superiors as he returns to his work. And every decent Catholic should hope for that for the priest. Anybody who is accused of doing something they didn't do, something that is heinous, should be able to get their life back. Priests have a much harder time of that than anybody else, because, relatively speaking, a handful of wicked priests and bishops who helped them destroyed the public perception of priests in the West, just as a general thing. Talk to a priest sometime. Ask them what happens when they travel in their clerics. You will hear a mix, at best, of both good and bad. They all have bad stories to tell about what happens when they are identified as a priest in public. And the problem is, many priests, well, most Catholics in general, have this unfortunate subconscious distrust of a lot of priests now. I have been told by family members and by friends to not let my kids be alone near a priest. Well, they don't have to worry. Most priests have a survival instinct that tells them not to be alone near young children. Even though, statistically, the vast, overwhelming majority of priests are the most trustworthy people you could ever meet. And we are wired as Catholics, even if we are defenders of priests, when something is said against a priest of this kind, there's that part of us that just leaps to believe it. I want you to think about how bad that is for priests, how heavy of a cross they have to carry, given to them because of the evil deeds of men who were not fit to be priests, who were themselves either placed in the priesthood or by people trying to destroy the church, if you read Bella Dodd's accounts of these things, or were placed in the priesthood by men who were themselves placed in the priesthood to destroy the church. This is what we're dealing with. And as Catholics, we should reflect on our own lack of trust for priests, because it is a severe tragedy. And I hope this priest gets his good name back. We go to Catholic News Agency with the headline, Father Carlos Martins cleared of misdemeanor charges after incident at Illinois parish. They should be, the word alleged should be right there where I highlighted, because it was alleged to have happened. Here are the details for context. Well, here are the details, then I'll go to another article for some context on what was said more than what happened here. The popular podcasting priest, Father Carlos Martins, is no longer facing criminal charges after an alleged, I will insert, incident at an Illinois parish last year led to misdemeanor allegations. The Burke Law Group said in a Wednesday press release that the priest who hosts the Exorcist Files podcast had been, quote, fully cleared of all charges stemming from a November 21st, 2024 event held at Queen of Apostles Parish in Joliet, Illinois. Attorney Marcella Burke told CNA in November that the disputed incident occurred when Martins touched a young girl's hair while telling a joke about his own baldness. The joke occurred publicly, quote, in a classroom setting with teachers, clergy, parish staff, and volunteers present. Now, we're going to pause here. Should the priest have done that? No. Not because it's It would be weird for someone to touch your child's hair. It would be weird, but it does happen, and most of the time you just brush it off. But we have such an ingrained lack of trust in our own priests now, even ones who have demonstrated that they're actually Catholic, that people just explode and they assume the worst. And that is what happened to this priest. Was he guilty of anything? If so, it was probably a momentary lack of discretion, a lack of prudence, maybe. This is what can happen to a priest. Their life can be destroyed with an offhanded, thoughtless action that normal people can get away with. The incident led to Will County prosecutors filing a criminal complaint against Martins in January, one that alleged that Martins went so far as to place the girl's hair in his mouth. On Wednesday, the Burke Law Group said that the prosecutors, quote, withdrew those charges and dismissed the case without any finding of any wrongdoing or criminal liability on the part of the priest. Burke on Wednesday told CNA the charge carried a maximum penalty of 365 days in jail and a $2,500 fine. In the press release, the attorney said the dismissal of the charges was, quote, exactly the result we were expecting. What he was charged with was simply absurd, Burke said. This is his lawyer. This was a case that never should have been brought forward. The court's ruling is a full vindication of Father Martin's innocence from the beginning of any and all criminal wrongdoing. The priest, meanwhile, said in the release that he was, quote, deeply grateful to all who offered their prayers and support during this time. I am thankful for the truth coming to light, and I look forward to resuming my ministry and continuing to preach the gospel, the priest said. I'm going to pause again here. And he will have trouble, because there are Catholics who will not care what the court said. They will believe the worst things about him. That is simply the truth. Please pray for our own hardened hearts and for this priest. This is why I don't talk about very much the attacks on priests when priests are alleged to have done something. I don't generally talk about them because, I mean, how many times can you talk about some James Martin type priest doing McCarrick type deeds to somebody? But even more so, you have to be absolutely sure when this happens that the person is said to have did what they were said to have done. Because it is impossible for a priest to fully recover from this. And I have that from the lips of priests who've told me this. From long before I was ever a podcaster, that priests know. Most of them know. The vets know that they can never get their name back if something happens. So most of them take precautions to make sure there is no opportunity for someone to see some normal interaction happening and think the worst. There is no recovery for them. Maybe Father Carlos Martins will be the first. He's a priest of the Companions of the Cross order. The order had not yet released a statement on the case by Wednesday afternoon. He was visiting the Illinois parish as part of his national touring exhibit of a relic of the arm of St. Jude the Apostle via the ministry Treasures of the Church. He told EWTN News in 2023 that it was, quote, the first time the arm of the saint had left Italy. Pretty historic event. We'll go to American Magazine from an article they published back in the days when this was news. Headline, exorcist priest pleads not guilty to battery charge over alleged incident during a relics tour. I'm going to remind you, they were calling it battery. They said that he put a young girl's hair in his mouth, which he didn't do, but that's what they said. And that's what the system came after him for. Never let it be said that the secular authorities are kind of indifferent to the church. They're not. They're hostile, and they look for every opportunity to go after the church. Every single opportunity. Case in point, this case was on its face absurd. So it was almost as absurd as the stuff said about Cardinal Pell, honestly, except Cardinal Pell's was just absolute fiction. There was literally nothing in reality to base it on. At least in this case, the priest touched a girl's hair when it was imprudent to do so. And that act of imprudence was used to destroy him. He pled not guilty January 27th in an Illinois court to misdemeanor charge of battery over an alleged incident that took place during a national relic tour. The criminal charge obtained by Our Sunday Visitor News and filed by the state's attorney's office accuses the priest of, quote, knowingly without legal justification by any means made physical contact of an insulting or provoking nature with persons whose initials are IK, a minor, in that said defendant placed the hair of IK in his mouth. Class A misdemeanor in the state of Illinois. Utterly nonsensical. And the parents were involved in the prosecution because, of course, they were. Because we're all wired as Catholics to not trust our priests anymore. And it's not just on McCarrick stuff. It's, how many times have you seen a priest give a political homily? Or the prayers of the faithful suddenly becoming full of partisan intentions? I've been witness to it in person. So I haven't been to a Novus Ordo in 5 years or longer at this point. AKC says with a super chat, I suggest that each of us in the comment section commit to praying a decade of the rosary for Father Martins. And that is an excellent idea. If you can do a full rosary, keep them as in part of your intentions for your full rosary today, even better. But a full decade, wonderful. Love that idea. Pray for the priest. And pray for, and in general, remember to pray for your priests daily. Here's the press release from the law firm. Came from the Burke Law Group Twitter account. Our client, Father Carlos Martins, Catholic priest, popular evangelist, and best-selling author, is fully cleared of all charges stemming from a relic exposition held on November 21st, 2024 at Queen of the Apostles Parish in Joliet. And here's the press release, been shared by a lot of accounts. But they also here include the circuit court order clearing his name. Well, as close to clearing his name as can be done with a priest. It's the cause comes on the state's motion for deferred prosecution in Ole Pascoe. The court, having reviewed the motion and being fully advised in the premises, consideration of the interest of the justice hereby finds as follows. The state has confirmed that Father Martins has never been charged with a crime, accused of any allegations of impropriety with minors, nor subject to any form of canonical discipline as a priest. The state has confirmed that Father Martins is in full compliance with all safe environment and child protection training protocols required by his religious community, the Archdiocese of Detroit, and the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. This includes the Virtus Protecting God's Children program, etc., etc. The state has conferred with the alleged victim and complied with all notice and other requirements under Illinois Crime Victims Act. The court has considered of all facts known to regarding the underlying circumstances of this matter. It is therefore ordered the state's attorney motion for deferred prosecution is granted and this matter is dismissed, meaning they're done. They're not going to go forward with anything else. This has been shared widely because this is legitimately good news. And I know some will say, why are you be so dour about this? Because like I keep saying, a priest can't get his name back. Not completely. And it's because of men like James Martin, who are complicit in helping facilitate men who should not be in the priesthood being in the priesthood, who come from a group who have a weird tendency that is statistically beyond any normal comparison to other groups, who have a taste for the most young. That is a fact. You're not supposed to talk about that, but it's a fact. And within that own group, there are voices who are like, look, you all got to stop doing this. This is evil, and you're making the rest of us look bad. Well, churchmen ignore the linkage between James Martin types and McCarrick types because there's a perfect correlation between them. I know, I've seen the statistical studies on this. Happy to see that Catholic News Agency was the one who reported on this. Now, that's unfortunately not the only people who need to get their good name back. You might recall, in the Archdiocese of Detroit, I reported here, as have others, that 3 conservative, meaning they taught Catholicism. That's what it means to be conservative in the church now. But they were seminary professors at the seminary in Detroit, were purged from the seminary because they taught Catholicism. Now, that's not the excuse given. The excuse given by the diocese was that these teachers had the temerity to point to Pope Francis as teaching heterodoxy, meaning things that were something different than the Catholic faith. They would go after him, and not just in like dusty theological articles that almost nobody reads, but they would go after him on podcasts and on social media. That's a no-no. If you've ever wondered why more voices in the priesthood didn't speak out against Pope Francis, and they're probably not going to speak out about bad things going on under the new Pope, it's because of stories like that one, where 3, including Ralph Martins and Dr. Edwards, were canceled from there. We've got an update here, and the update we're seeing here is now the propaganda campaign to defend what Archbishop Weissenberger has done. Because Archbishop Weissenberger is no friend of orthodoxy, to put it mildly. Go to the National Catholic Reporter. Under this unfortunate headline, Archbishop Weissenberger confronts problem number 1 in Detroit, the seminary. Problem number 1 in Detroit is not the seminary. Problem number 1 in that diocese is the same as in almost every diocese in the Western world. Most Catholics who go to Mass on a regular basis don't believe what the Church teaches about the Eucharist. Full stop. Every study has shown that. To the point where even Bishop Robert Barron, that voice of moderation in the Church, is utterly flabbergasted whenever this topic comes up when he's giving a talk somewhere. This isn't just rad trads pointing this out. This is also conservatives and moderates pointing this out too. The number 1 problem in that diocese is not that you have seminary professors who corrected Pope Francis when he needed correcting, to warn people about what it was he was teaching. No, instead, it's a widespread problem of most Catholics not being Catholics because they reject basic Catholic teachings on basic theology. And if you don't accept those theological teachings, you aren't a Catholic. You're something else. Written by Michael Sean Winters, who's never missed an opportunity to defend some evil action by some prelate who should be managing a Walmart somewhere. From the article, quote, "The news that Archbishop Edward Weissenberger of Detroit terminated the employment of 3 professors at the Archdiocesan Sacred Heart Major Seminary is creating a lot of buzz in church circles. The removals are long overdue, and kudos to Weissenberger, who was installed as Archbishop on March 18th for doing it. The 3 men terminated are Ralph Martin, Eduardo Echeverria, and Edward Peters. All 3 had cast aspersions on Pope Francis, even questioning his orthodoxy. They did not restrict their criticism to scholarly articles in theological journals. They did so on blogs and in magazine interviews. Whether they intended it or not, and it is difficult to see how they did not intend it, their criticisms contributed to a hostility to Francis that is widespread in certain powerful sectors of the Catholic Church in the United States. Peter Fairhard's excellent 2019 story about Sacred Heart being a hotbed of anti-Francis sentiment revealed the extent and the obnoxiousness of that sentiment. I had previously tangled with Peters over the years. For example, when he criticized something I had written about threats to marriage. There is certainly room in academic circles for criticism of papal teaching, but the criticisms should always be rendered respectfully. I was in seminary when the Vatican took steps to remove Father Charles Curran. He was my professor for Moral Theology 101, and he certainly differed from the magisterium on several hot-button issues, but his critique was thoughtful and respectful. Curran was as persuasive when he presented magisterial teaching as he was when he explained his differences. He certainly never claimed that his teaching represented the authentic magisteriums and not the popes." End quote. All right, I want to tell you about Father Charles Curran. I have a book on Catholic social teaching on my bookshelf by Father Charles Curran. For if you don't know, I don't flex my PhD much, but I have one. I did my work in essentially political science, basically. And what I wrote my doctoral dissertation on was sustainable development as a policy area and how the Catholic Church had an answer to the secular approach to it. And so I wrote a doctoral dissertation on Catholic social teaching, basically. I had to make it much more moderate and pro Laudato Si than I wanted to, but my committee chairman was a college professor who basically told me that the church isn't against the modernist heresy anymore. And when he told me that, I talked to a couple of very conservative Novus Ordo priests who agreed that I should just give them the document they want and then work afterwards to against these errors. I still don't know how I feel about that advice, but I did take it. Now, one thing piece of advice I got was from a missionary priest from Argentina, who was ordained by Cardinal Bergoglio. And this priest is extraordinarily conservative. I know it was the weirdest thing when I found out he was ordained by then Cardinal Bergoglio, but he told me when looking at my Catholic social teaching books that I was picking up at the early stages of my doctoral dissertation to avoid, like the plague, Father Charles Curran, because Father Charles Curran was a heretic. Full stop. Father Charles Curran never saw a social justice issue for the secular world that he didn't want to foist onto the Catholic Church and twist the teachings of the Church around. So Father Charles Curran getting canceled by Rome was a defense of the magisterial teachings of the faith, especially when it came to social questions. Invoking him here is funny because it sort of gives his bias away. It would be funny if it were not so dangerous that these conservative critics of Francis almost always accuse him of sowing confusion when it is their attempt to replace the authentic magisterium with their own theology that is the principal point of confusion. At Crisis Magazine, editor Eric Sammons asked, "So why would two distinguished theologians with no hint of scandal associated with them be unceremoniously fired from their positions without warning or even explanation? The scandal is that they were forming priests, and priests must be loyal to their bishop, as the bishop must be loyal to the Pope. That is how a Catholic ecclesiology works. The professors were avatars of dissent in a culture built on obedience." Besides, Salmon's own answer to his question is repugnant. Simply put, they, the fired professors, dared to criticize the regime, and for that they must be purged. He goes on to deliver harsh, unsubstantiated indictments of the character and leadership of Weissenberger, Chicago Cardinal Blaise Supich, and of course, Francis. Sammons, too, has forgotten that the old joke about being more Catholic than the Pope is just that, a joke. And it goes on like that. That is essentially regime media going to full defense of the purge of Catholic teachers at a seminary by one of the new rising stars of badness, of terrible leadership in the church in America, and that would be Archbishop Weissenberger. He's not the only one. Steve Skojek posted a screenshot from an X account that I'm blocked by on his Substack. It's from Mike Lewis. If you're not familiar with Mike Lewis, he's the proprietor of Where Peter Is. Mike Lewis is is a voice that for some reason people who are on our side of things tend to make fun of, and I don't know why. Mike Lewis is actually one of the most dangerous minds that they have. I don't know why they don't use him more often. He is very, very effective at communication. He's a very intelligent person. You should take him seriously. Here's what he had to say. Many people have been asking why I described the recent fired seminary professors in Detroit as heterodox or said they dissent from the magisterium. This is the talking point that you're going to see in defense of this. In a nutshell, they have been teaching an erroneous definition of Catholic orthodoxy for years. In their vision, fidelity to the Catholic Church has more to do with holding to a list of doctrinal precepts deemed traditional and absolutely unchanging, rather than as being part of the people of God, in communion with and obedience to the church that Christ founded, led by the successors of the apostles, the bishops, with and under the successor of Peter, the Pope, who is the visible source of unity in the church and guarantor of fidelity to the Word of God. And that's a very effective statement. But he's missing one kind of thing. It's not supposed to be either or. And when it becomes either or, the saints, going back to the Arian heresy, tell us that if you have to choose, you cling to tradition until the situation gets sorted out. You cling to tradition, no matter who is introducing novelty in the church. Recorded the entirety of St. Vincent of Lerins' landmark work, The Commentary, for this channel in one-chapter pieces, sometimes two-chapter pieces when he was writing very short chapters. I recommend you listen to it. Or if you don't want to listen to me read, go buy a copy of it on Amazon. It's super cheap, and it's one of the most accessible writings of the Church Fathers you will ever go through. In it, he describes the situation he was dealing with, the heresy of Arius, and how most of the bishops of the church had gone along with it, and for whatever reason, the Pope wasn't doing too good a job of standing up against it. And so what he did was lay the foundation for what gets called Recognize and Resist. And he did it in like the 4th century. I recommend you read that book. because Mike Lewis is basically trying to counter-argue and counter-signal St. Vincent of Lerins. And I became aware of St. Vincent of Lerins really for this because Pope Francis kept quoting him as if he was endorsing what he was doing to the church, when in reality, St. Vincent of Lerins was standing against men like Francis. When we go back to the idea of getting your good name back, the three seminary professors, Martins, Echeverria, and Edwards, cannot get their good names back. What are the chances they get jobs at a seminary? Probably non-existent. The FSSP seminaries won't hire them because the FSSP are always getting an apostolic visitation every year. Every year they get one to make sure they're on the team. I doubt the SSPX would because these seminary professors are pretty conservative, but again, as I was reminded by people after my initial report, they weren't traditionalists either. They were on the team when it came to Vatican II, and it wasn't good enough to protect them because they said bad things about Dear Leader. If the modernist magisterium is heretical, does not obedience have limits? Yes, error has no rights. It's one of the oldest axioms of the Catholic faith. Error has no rights, including the right to obedience. All right, folks, I'm very curious what you have to say about this. Let me know in the comments. Please pray for everybody we spoke about today. Mike Lewis, the Michael Sean Winters, pray for them. Pray for everybody who made for Archbishop Weissenberger. I'm not trying to make you mad at him. He does a good enough job at that without my help. Richard Corin with the super chat. Thank you for being a member. 26 months, sir. It is appreciated. Pray you are well as a family. Could you please give the title of the book again? Yes, that would be The Comminatory. Put it in the chat because it's got a weird spelling. By St. Vincent of Lerins. You can find it on Amazon. It's not big. It's like that thick. It's very easy to read. A person could probably read it in an afternoon if they really wanted to. But I do recommend you read a little bit and then think about what you were reading. I don't care if you watch my recording of it or not. Don't tell you about that for the clicks. Just go buy a copy of it if you need, if it's better for you. It's one of the most important things you will read because I have not seen a rebuttal of it. All right, folks, thanks very much for tuning in today. I'm a little worked up about this because everybody we spoke about today, good luck getting their good names back after a smear campaign. Thanks very much for tuning in today. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.